Have you ever wondered what the Unifi network of a mediocre tech YouTuber looks like? Really? Well, today is your lucky day because that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be going over my full network setup from the hardware I'm using, what my Wi-Fi configuration is, VPNs, VLANs, and firewall rules. So let's take a look at it. Oh yeah, just to let you guys know, this is my personal setup. This is what I actually use. So this isn't like what is the optimal setup or what should you do to utilize every single feature in Unifi for a small business. No, this is my personal setup. So yeah. Okay, here we are. This is the Unifi dashboard. I am on Unifi OS 3.2.7 and network 8.0.24. And yes, I realize there's an update. So yeah, here's the Unifi dashboard. Like I said, this isn't going to be a walkthrough of all the Unifi features. It's just going to be what I'm using. And for the dashboard, I like looking at it. It's pretty, as are most things in the Unifi network UI. But yeah, I don't think you guys really care about that. So let's take a look at the hardware and how I have it configured. So what we'll do, here's everything, and we'll minimize this all down and kind of branch out as we go. So I do run a multiple WAN configuration. I have AT&T as my primary and Comcast as the backup. Those feed into a Dream Machine Pro. And then we have a 10 gigabit connection to my main switch, which is the which is the Enterprise XG24, 10 ports of 10 gigabit RJ45 and two 25 gig ports. So that is a 10 gig backhaul. And then downstream from that, we have our Enterprise 8 PoE and our Enterprise 24 PoE, both with 10 gigabit. And the reason I'm doing this is because everything that needs to communicate inter-vlan wise, meaning that from one VLAN to another, has to traverse all the way up from here. If the client is connected to here and the other one is over here, it has to go all the way up to the router, which is the Dream Machine Pro, and then back down. So if you have a 1 gigabit line somewhere in here, yeah, it's going to be much slower. Now, I do have clients connected to here and here and here as well, as I'll show you in a bit, but it's much cleaner to just walk through it this way. So yeah. And downstream from the 24 PoE, we have some access points and little switches. So here you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 access points and some little mini switches that I have kind of sprinkled around the house. And then downstream from the 8 PoE, we have 2 access points and another little switch. So yeah, that would be the full kind of Unifi hardware setup. And if I go ahead and show clients as well, it gets very messy. So here's all the wired clients. As you can see, I have a crap ton of 10 gigabit clients for that 10 gigabit switch, because obviously I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't need it. That's a joke. And then downstream, you can see more clients, what have you. And here is our laptop that we're on. But yeah, that's my hardware setup. I have a couple of videos going over the more specifics about this, but for now, that's all that really matters. So I mentioned we're not really going to go over the dashboard. You guys have seen the Unifi dashboard a billion times if you have a Unifi setup. If you don't, here it is. Pause the video, take a look at it. But what I did want to talk about is a couple of new features they have added, and one is the ports UI, which is fantastic. Because from here, you can choose between all your switches and see what's going on all the ports and configure the ports. So I can switch easily between my XG24, my 24 PoE, my 8 PoE, and obviously you get the gist of that. It's really cool because everything's color coded. Everything lets you know if there's PoE on the line. You can click on it and modify that specific port. So for example, if I wanted my NVR specifically to be on a separate VLAN, I can easily change the native VLAN here. Bada bing, bada boom. It's on a different VLAN. Going into the 24, you can see they're obviously color coded depending on the speed. So our uplink on 2 is gigabit. But yeah, you can see everything else is running at 10 gigabit speeds. It tells you what that client is. You can click on it again, obviously adjust the settings. You can come up here and click on the actual client and make some changes there. You can see the IP, the MAC address, everything you need to know about what's going on your switches and your ports. Radios is how you see how your Wi-Fi setup is doing and what the signal strengths are, and basically kind of a summary. And they have it broken down by access point, and you can filter that down as well by frequency or by MIMO setup. So 2x2, 4x4, or you can just look at everything. Unifi, Unifi 6, I have quite a few different Wi-Fi SSIDs, but we'll talk about that in a second. They have a coverage tab, which is pretty cool. So this will let you know how good your Wi-Fi coverage is, and if you need to go to unifistore.com, I can't remember if that's the actual URL, and buy some more Unifi equipment. But you can see there's a little chart that shows you the physical rate on the y-axis and the signal strength on the X. So thermostats on Wi-Fi 4, so yeah, it makes sense. Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 4. Okay, so these are all the low physical rate devices with terrible strength because they're using old Wi-Fi 4 technologies. And these are IoT devices, so I don't really care too much about those. Up here, we're looking at server camera, our smart TV, my laptop, pretty good up here. But yeah, so it's decent. It's saying up here, one access point, the server room. Might need improvement over here, and that's fine. I think that's where all the IoT devices are connected to, and it's literally on top of my server rack. So that's perfectly fine. These could be improved, but for now, everything seems fine. I've never had a problem with Wi-Fi, so I'm probably gonna just stick with this. Then you can scroll through connectivity, environment, none of the stuff I actually really use too much, so we're not gonna talk about it. Gateway, this just breaks down where your traffic is going and what it's doing over a period of time. You can see over a week, over a month. See, a lot was going on here, and that was probably some major backups to my remote Synology system, so that makes sense. All right, so going into my internet connection, like I said, I have a primary and a backup, AT&T and Comcast. Those both feed into my Dream Machine Pro. That wasn't a voice crack. You're just hearing things. And then I've set a primary and a secondary. The load balancing type, I've done failover only because I wanted to use AT&T as the primary and only go to Xfinity if AT&T is down. Distributed, you could do it this way, but the Xfinity line is pretty bad, so I just would rather stick to just using that fiber gigabit ISP. And yeah, not much to really talk about that. One thing to talk about, though, is going into each of those ISPs allows you to set the DNS server per ISP. So you can see in here, I have a primary server, which looks like a local address because it is. That's feeding into a Pi-hole instance that's only being used for DNS resolving because I actually hate the way Unifi handles DNS. In Unifi network. So I have a couple of things that specifically require a DNS resolver that Unifi can't do. So the main is going to a Pi-hole instance and the backup is Cloudflare's. Okay, moving on to my actual networks. I have a couple of VLANs here. So I have a default, a guest, an IoT, a LAN 2 for testing, an external one, and a Ceph network. And I went over this briefly in my home lab tour video, but we'll talk about it a bit more here because some things have changed in terms of the firewall and the inter-vlan communications that I'd like to discuss. But before I do that, let's dip over into Wi-Fi so you guys can see the Wi-Fi SSIDs I have set up and kind of how it works. So right now I have 5. I have a Unifi, a Unifi 6, a Unifi 6E, a guest, and an IoT. These 3 could probably be smashed together into one main one, but I've separated them for testing purposes and whatnot. So the Unifi one essentially broadcasts to everything. It's essentially all access points. Only broadcasts on 2.4 and 5 because we're not dealing with 6E there because I wanted a separate one for specific 6E testing, which if we go back and go into our 6E, guess what? That's only broadcasting on the 6 gigahertz and only using my U6 Enterprise. These are things you probably won't set up. You'll probably just have a main one, a guest one, and an IoT one. So for my guest one, it's using all of them, and it's using the guest network here. So we're using that guest VLAN, which is really cool. So that specific SSID is on the guest network. And the IoT one, same thing, same concept for all my IoT devices on the IoT network. Like I mentioned, quite a few VLANs. We talked about our IoT one. We talked about the guest one. Default is just a main LAN. LAN 2 is just for testing separate network, so it gets its own little LAN 2 VLAN. External is where I host my services. If we go down, I'll give you a brief refresher of my home lab tour video. This is where I host my cluster that is pointed out and hosting external things like my Schlink, my Owncast, my R setup, and stuff like that. And that is on the 192.168.40 network, which is our external network. Externals on that tag 40 and gets this subnet. So yeah, again, go check out that video if you want a further explanation on those. But the main thing I wanted to talk about is how I have my VLANs set up in terms of firewall rules. So how they communicate with each other. And this is similar to what I showed in the previous video, but I've updated it and simplified it. So let's talk about this and then we'll dive into the actual rules. So here's all my VLANs. Ignore these little mini circles for now. Ignore essentially all of everything except these little bubbles. So these are my VLANs. Each of them has a different reason for existing, which means that each of them will require slightly different firewall rules. So starting with LAN 2, we have this set to nothing can get out of LAN 2, meaning that anything in here, any client device can't talk to any other VLAN. And that is pretty similar for all the other ones. So nothing out, nothing in for Ceph. We'll talk about that in a second. Nothing out for external, nothing out for IoT. Now, this doesn't mean it can't get out to the internet. It just means that it can't talk to other VLANs. And then guest, that one looks a little weird because it is isolated. So let's go take a look at that. I'll briefly explain it. So what you can do is click on the actual network. So for guest, you can go down here and you can see there's this isolation checkbox. And what that does, essentially, it doesn't allow anything in the network to talk to any other VLAN, and it also doesn't allow any clients within that VLAN to talk to each other. So I didn't want that for all of these. That's why guest is the only one isolated. So any people that come over, their device, when they connect to that guest network, can't talk to anything else. So let's start with these arrows and what's going on here. So main, you can see has arrows to almost everything. And these are essentially no rules needed. My main VLAN can talk to essentially all of these VLANs. And I wanted that because if I'm using my main PC and I want to debug things, I want to make sure that I can reach everything in other VLANs so that I can not only debug things and test things, but also, create new things. I don't want to have to jump through hoops to be able to get onto that network. And the reason this says no rules needed is because by default, all VLANs are open to talk to each other. Now we said nothing out, nothing out, nothing out, nothing out, but we didn't say nothing in, which means main can get into all these except Ceph, because that also has nothing in. So that explains why main can talk to these, but again, these can't talk to anything else. Now these green lines will make more sense when we actually dive into the rules, so let's go ahead and do that. So if we go into security, we're going to go into firewall rules. I lied, we're going into traffic rules first. Then we'll go to local network. This is where you do all of your inter-vlan rules. So let's put these side by side because this will make things a lot easier. We'll start with these nothing out rules. So these are going to be block rules. And the way Unifi works for traffic rules is that you do your block rules first and then it'll propagate down to your allow rules. So allow rules will essentially take precedence over blocking rules. So you can set up a block to everything, but then say, you know what, actually allow this, and the allow rule will take precedence. So the order of this doesn't matter. I wish I could switch them around for readability, but I can't. But just know that it has nothing to do with the order here. Block rules first, and then it'll say, okay, then you can allow. So the first one, block external out. We're saying local network is external. Everything else, all devices, block traffic from all local networks. So from external to everything, block it. Meaning block external out, nothing out. And you'll see that the others look exactly the same. Block IoT out, same thing. I wish it would just go back to the local networks. Block LAN 2 out and block Ceph in and out. So that's the only one that's kind of different. The only difference is we've set this to and from, meaning that blah, 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 meaning that nothing can get out or in. Now, why did we do that? That's because this Ceph network only exists for the Ceph clients to talk to each other. So they don't need to get out or in. They just need to talk to each other, and that's it. But you will notice that there is an allow rule in here. So let's click on that and see what's going on. So this is our LAN to IoT and LAN 2 rule. Why do I have this? I don't think I need this. I think this was left over from my old configuration. So the joys of doing a live unscripted video. So we actually don't need this rule anymore. So what I can do is manage, allow, we're going to pause it. We're not going to delete it just yet in case shit breaks, but we don't need that. We should be able to hit LAN 2 and IoT no matter what. And to test that, let's look up a client in the IoT network. So IoT is .30. So let's see if we can ping our living room camera on 30.141. Okay, so if we look at the IP address we're currently on, you'll see that wired, we are on our main LAN, and wirelessly, we are on the guest network on that 168.50 subnet. So let's go ahead and see if we can ping, what was it? 30.141 specifically from that wired connection, and we can. And just to show you guys that we can't hit it from the guest VLAN, we'll try to ping it through our wireless guest network. And yeah, no communications. And I'm realizing that my face is in the way. So yeah, no communications between the guest network and our IoT network, but we do have communications from our main network to the IoT network. So you can see this is a very simplified setup. So what's this? What's going on here? So let me explain that. So we talked about the local network traffic rules, which is essentially entire VLANs to entire VLANs, but sometimes you have specific devices within those VLANs that want to communicate with specific devices in another VLAN that may have an overarching local network block rule. And that's what we have here. So to adjust those, you'll go into the IP address section, where you can see we have two rules which line up with these two green arrows. So let's talk about this one on the right first, and we'll zoom in. So here you can see we have a single device in the external network, 40.26, that needs to communicate with these main objects in our main VLAN. So if we go over here, you can see I just put them over here. It's just a list of IP addresses in my main network that need to be open to this specific external device. Now, under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be able to because we have that nothing out local network rule. But remember, allow rules take precedence. So going over here into IP addresses, we'll click on that specific rule. And what we're doing here is allowing our Docker instance to hit TrueNAS and Docker and some other clients that I've added because I'm running a dashboard over here, and to make sure that certain things are up, it needs to see them on the main network. Now, is this the best way to do it? No, this is just how I do it. And you can see we've set an allow rule for specific IP addresses, and we've just listed them here. And we do have the ability to specify a port too. So if you only need it to be able to hit a specific port, you can do that as well. So yeah, that's this rule. And the other one is kind of similar, except we've set that we want our entire external network, meaning everything, to communicate with a few IPs over here. So we want everything in this external network to be able to talk to a specific list of devices. So we don't have to specify just a device here. We can specify an entire network. And here you can see we can do that. If we want to do a specific device, we can select that. If we want a network, we can select that. And you can do specific ones, or you can do a range like I've done here. And that is the rules. Now, again, the best way would be to not ever allow anything into my main network. And I'm well aware of that, but this is my personal network. I'm not setting this up for a business or a client. I do this because it makes it easier for me, and that's just how I like having it set up. So don't use this as this is how I need to set up my network. Use this as kind of a guide on how I've set up my rules to use and adjust them accordingly to your needs. But keeping along the line of firewall rules, let's go in here and talk about the actual firewall rules. So coming into my actual network. So it's kind of broken down into two pieces, and I complained about this on my Is Unifi Even Good video, and I've adjusted them to where it's not as terrible. So the way these firewall rules work is that everything grayed out is either a default firewall rule or a port forwarding rule. So I have a couple of port forwarding rules in here for Minecraft, Nginx, and Plex. And the thing I don't like about this is that, so for Nginx, I set this up as my proxy manager. So I've opened up port 443 and I forwarded that to my Nginx proxy manager. But what happens when you do that in Unifi is that it creates a firewall rule that opens up that port and you can't change it. So 443 is open to everything. I don't like that. In Unifi, you can easily change, or Unifi, in pfSense, you can change what it actually allows in. And the reason I want that is because everything's coming through Cloudflare. So I know what IP addresses should be coming in and what shouldn't. Luckily, you can do that with these two rules you can add up here. So the first one is allow Cloudflare. And what this does is it's an internet in rule to allow and accept all protocols on these specific list of IPs. Now, this is a list of IPs from Cloudflare's website. If we go to profiles and we go to IP groups, Cloudflare, there's 15 of them. And this is a list of Cloudflare servers. So anything coming into my network that I've hosted will be coming in through Cloudflare and only Cloudflare. And we wanted to ensure that if it's coming in on 443 and it's not from Cloudflare, it gets blocked. And this is the way you have to do that. You have to set the allow first and make sure this is at the top. And then you have to set a block on 443. So you have a reject rule on all protocols from any source that's coming in on port 443. Now, if you do this out of order, it's not going to work. So make sure you have it set up exactly how I do. Just like this. So going back to traffic rules, you can set up region blocks. So I have a block on here. So block anything coming in from Russia, because obviously I did have China on there, but there were certain websites and stuff that I needed to be able to access from Chinese companies that want to send me products or that I need to work with. So I took China off that list. So I should probably update this, right? Block Russia. Cool. Okay, Unifi, when you're finished with something, can you return me to where I was before? This shit's annoying. And then in the internet tab, you can also do things like limiting the guest network bandwidth. So in here, I have a speed limit rule that basically says, yeah, if you're on the guest network, you only get 100 megabits up and 20, or 100 down and 20 up. And that is because I don't want any of my guests hogging all the bandwidth. So you only get 100 if you're at my house. Now for routing, we'll touch on this in a second, but let's take a look at my VPNs. There's not much here, to be honest. I have two VPN servers running. One is an OpenVPN and one is a WireGuard. OpenVPN I use for my Synology devices because it doesn't support WireGuard. WireGuard I use for my personal devices to get back into my network. because it's faster. Then I have a client set up through PIA VPN so that, if I have clients that need to go through a VPN that want their traffic masked and not to be seen by my ISP, they can be routed through PIA. And I don't have to do that on the client. That is handled in the firewall itself. So now that you've seen that, this will make more sense. So we have a traffic rule in here for routing that basically says this VPN virtual machine device, you're going to route all the traffic from that device through our PIA VPN client setup. Anytime I'm using that device, I don't have to configure anything in the client. All its traffic is going to go through PIA. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover, to be honest. So yeah, like I said, it's not a perfect network setup, but this is my network setup. And I kind of wanted to go over this because a lot of you wanted a more kind of bare bones network walkthrough and explanation. So that's what I tried to do here, and I hope that it helped. So if you did like this video, go ahead and drop a like. If you like network content like this, then go ahead and subscribe. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube members and my Patreons. You guys are my firewall rules that are much more intuitive than the firewall rules in Unifi, which is why you guys are awesome. But if you're still watching, you're a Unifi firewall rule. You get the job done, but could be better. So I appreciate you too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.